Hello and welcome, viewing audience. I know you've just watched the Knockout Powerhouse documentary that I saw. I'm happy to say I actually saw it, Stacey, 3 months ago, and we featured it a little bit in the Oprah magazine. Hope you're a subscriber. But COVID has changed everything. If it wasn't for COVID, it would have already made its debut at the Telluride Film Festival, but that's okay. Nothing can stop goodness. It's getting out, and this is one of those ways. So we've got Stacey Abrams, who is highlighted in the documentary, but don't call her the star of the show. She doesn't like that. But you can't be a star of the show without having great producers and great directors, and Lisa Cortés, Liz Garbus, Stacey Abrams, all here. So let's go. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. I am so worked up, I don't even know where to begin, because I watched that documentary, Stacey, and I just thought, I don't know how you are not in the fetal position today. You know, we followed the race. We all followed the race on the news, so we knew it. But this documentary gives us so many details that we didn't know. We all know that the opponent you were running against was also the one overseeing the election. And you all took us brilliantly in a step-by-step, guide-by-guide of what can happen when it comes to voter suppression. So first, Stacey, let's start with this. How were you not in the fetal position, and how were you not gnashing your teeth to powder whenever I see you? You're always still so pleasant and sane.
Because the fetal position is a defensive posture. And I know voter suppression can be defeated. I know that we can go on the offense. And particularly in years like this, when people are desperately aware of what's at stake, whether we're talking about the health ramifications of COVID-19, the economic depression, the racial reckoning, just the daily slog to make it through life under this current administration, but also the challenges people face on a local level. I know that if we don't articulate what's possible and then give people a sense of hope, then all is lost. So I curled into the fetal position for a few days after the election. Then I did as my family has taught me. I uncurled, I stood up, and I got to work.
Yeah, I call it, Stacey, a brief period of bereavement. And then one has to, I've had those moments you got to put on your big girl pants and carry on. But Liz and Lisa, you took us through the history of voter suppression. This really, when you look at it, guys, is not new. It's not new, Lisa. This has been going on for quite some time.
Absolutely, Gail. I think, what was important for Liz and I in unpacking this history was to show people that from the inception of our country, this has been built into the DNA, at 6% could vote. And so voter suppression keeps morphing, the face changes, we cut the head off the Hydra, but two new heads emerged, and they emerge though with the same intention. And that is kind of what our history that we're living in.
But you know what, Liz, this is the thing. Voter suppression works and continues to work and works very well. Do you think people understand that?
Well, to quote our fearless leader, Stacey here, the best antidote to voter suppression is voter turnout. So I think what's happening now, there are so many attacks on the validity of our elections, and there's so much conversation about it. Actually, maybe the silver lining of that is that people are learning more about how to vote, about if they can early vote, if they can drop off their mail-in ballot at a ballot collection box. So I think that the silver lining to these very difficult times is this conversation that we're having right here and that people are having all over the country.
Yeah. Stacey, the president has done what many believe is a very effective job in demonizing mail-in balloting, mail-in voting. And I think that he has really been very effective in letting people know. He calls it fraudulent, he calls it dangerous, he calls it fake. What is your answer to that? And there doesn't appear to be any evidence to support that, by the way.
I think the first responsibility is to debunk the notion that there is widespread voter fraud. That is a lie. You have, using the most conservative estimates, and when I say conservative, I mean the most conservative organizations' estimates. They say 1,300 examples out of 625 million votes cast over the last 20 years. But it's not enough to say voter fraud is a lie. We then have to explain why it's not true and that voter suppression is real. And the reality is what we hear coming from the President of the United States is intentional voter suppression that uses the specter of voter fraud as an excuse. But the good thing is people aren't listening. The Republican Party in Wisconsin is sending out ads trying to contradict the President of the United States of their own party because they know this is the wrong message. But the other piece, and why I'm so excited about All In for Voting and All In the work that we're doing, is that people know there's a toolbox. It's about having the right to vote by mail, but it's also having the right to vote in person early and vote on election day. And what we really need people to think about when they hear this clarion call that comes from the president that is wrong, they need to think about the fact that if they make a plan for voting, then the options will be there. If you live in a state where you can vote early, great. If you live in a state where you can vote early and vote by mail, excellent. If you can live in a state where all of these options are available, figure out what you need to do, but plan to vote early. That's the best antidote to the lies coming from the White House and the truth of voter suppression.
Yeah, I love the title. I love the title, Lisa, All In, the Fight for Democracy. What's interesting to me is that both parties say that it's a fight for democracy. Can they both be right on this point?
Well, I think it's more important, are the people right?
Yeah.
You know, are the people right at democracy? And the fundamental root of it is the people and rule. Do we have the access to the participation in deciding who represents us? And I think that is kind of the fundamental question that we need to focus on and to plan and to mobilize to have that kind of engagement.
Mm-hmm. You know, in the documentary, there's a great line where it said, you know, Liz, that voters had to jump through hoops just to vote. Are you optimistic as we prepare to go to the polls this November 3rd? Are you optimistic about how it's going to go?
I don't think optimism is the word that is in my on
I
the
hear
tip of my
you.
tongue these days. But I do say, like I said before, that the silver lining is that these conversations are happening. And one of the first things Stacey said to me when I first met her was, you know, and part of white privilege, right, is not having to think about voter suppression, right, like, or not having to think about long lines at the polls. And one of the things that Stacey said to me when I first met her was, you know, folks show up and they say, oh, you've already voted, or, you know, oh, I'm sorry, you're not registered at this precinct. And they walk away and they think it's their fault, right? They must have done something wrong. Did they not send something in? What were they supposed to do? What did they do wrong? And what we're here trying to say is, no, this is a feature, not a bug in the system. And to give you the tools that if that happens to you, what do? You request a provisional ballot. You know, what are the things that you can do? And you can go to our website, allinforvoting.com, which educates you about your rights. And I think that's what gives me optimism, is that the information is getting out there.
Yeah, you know, Stacey, there were some jaw-dropping moments, I thought, in the doc where you go to the polls and you ask the most ridiculous questions that you're expected to answer before you can vote. Can you give an example of that? And do you believe that that is something that could happen today?
Well, let's think about this. Before the Voting Rights Act, if you lived in the South, if you lived in Alabama, they could ask you to explain the bond law section of the state code. But as late as 1975, William Rehnquist, who would go on to become Supreme Court Chief Justice, not more than a decade later, he was administering literacy tests, asking Native Americans to explain the Constitution to his satisfaction.
So he's on the front line. He was on the front line. Yes.
And so you remember, this happened in 1975. This is an ancient history. And the importance of what Liz and Lisa have been able to bring to the screen, and the documentary folks just saw, is that we have to remember that it is a constant and present danger to democracy to have anyone think that they have the right to prevent an eligible American from casting a vote. But the answer is making sure people know, as Liz was saying, that they know their rights, that they know their right to vote is real. Because what was the literacy test of the 1970s and 1960s is now the restrictive voter ID, where if you are a student living in Wisconsin, Georgia, or Texas, you can't use your student ID, but in Texas, you can use your gun license. It's shutting down polling places in places like Georgia and in Arizona and in in Texas, where it creates long lines and where people who otherwise are eligible to vote have no control over whether or not they can meet the standards. We have to have
But
a
it's another
democracy.
form then, Stacey. It's another form of voter suppression. That's why it's so frightening to me. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the thing to remember is that it only works when we are willing to either let it happen without challenge, or when we think that it's a legitimate control. Because democracy is not partisan. And I say this as a Democrat. Democrats were the arbiters of voter suppression for decades. I'm from the South, and I know what Democrats were capable of when we use voter suppression to hold power. Luckily, I'm part of a new party that doesn't do that, but we've got a party, the Republican Party, that has taken up the mantle. But ultimately, it is the right of a citizen to vote, and the party you're a part of does not matter. It should not have any effect over your ability to cast a vote.
What concerns you most, Lisa, as we get ready? Let's say we're armed, we know all the information, we go to the polls. What concerns you most as we get ready for November?
I think history has shown us that the tactics keep changing, and
They do seem to keep moving the goalposts.
Yes, and with that comes despair. So my concern is that if you do not plan, if you do not check your registration, that you will arrive and the despair and the hopelessness will, make you feel that you cannot vote and that you will not exercise this most fundamental right and duty. This is our civic duty.
Yeah. Yeah. Liz, why did you take this topic on? Was there something in particular that you thought, we've got to do something? I know the two of you are a knockout 1-2 punch when it comes to these kind of documentaries, but was there something in particular, or was it something you just been thinking about? You saw
It was something in particular.
Yeah.
It was something in particular. It was Stacey Abrams, and Stacey wanted to make a film, and we were the lucky journey people alongside her.
Mm-hmm. And when you heard Stacey's story, were you watching it in real time? I was watching it in real time, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was a race, of course, that had so much attention on it, and rightfully so. First of all, Stacey represented a new kind of leadership for Georgia, which was very exciting and stoked all of our hopes. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Gayle, the reality of Kemp being the not just the opposing team, but the ref was very alarming. And it was like, a slow motion train wreck in that way. But actually, I don't want to say train wreck, because actually the number of people who came to the polls and were counted and had their voices heard was unprecedented. And, that kind of engagement, hopefully it carries forward into our future. And that is a cause for optimism. Like the new voters who showed up, who were reached, who finally felt like they had a platform that meant something to their lives.
Mm-hmm. And I remember that night, Stacey, you did not concede. You deliberately did not concede.
I didn't. And I want to take it back to a question you asked earlier. Mm-hmm. And I approached Liz about this film. She'd already been thinking about the issue of voter suppression and how to tell the story. I wanted to tell a story where I wasn't the center. And she and Lisa, when she was smart enough to bring Lisa on board, they understood that my story could be a centerpiece for this larger narrative. And I think they've done an exceptional job. But the non-concession speech for me was essential, because you cannot fix something you refuse to admit is broken. And if politicians in particular continue this, gracious dance of, oh, well, it was just too bad, instead of saying there are people who've been denied their rights and we have to stand up for them. This film is an opportunity for me on a larger scale, on behalf of so many others, to say, this is your right. I don't have the right to win an election. I have the right to a fair election. I have the right to a free election. I have the right to a safe election. I don't have the right to win, but every citizen has the right to be heard. And the minute we make voter suppression about the politicians and not the people, we've already lost. You asked about optimism. I'm not an optimist, but I believe in our democracy. I'm a patriot. And I think these two women are patriots as well. And I know you are, Gayle, and our responsibility is to defend this most sacred notion of who we are, which is that we get to pick who speaks for us.
I like what you just said, Stacey. You said, I don't have the right to win, but I do have the right to a fair election. And you can't change if you don't acknowledge that the system is broken. Has anyone acknowledged to you personally that the system is broken?
On the record, no.
Yeah.
Anyone in charge of the system? No.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay because
Why is that okay? Why is that okay? I'm not kidding. I watched that documentary and I felt such a range of emotions watching it.
oh, I'm still angry. I'm like
Oh.
Incredible Hulk angry about this. But I
You're
don't
not green. Yeah.
thank you. I prefer blue.
Yeah.
But the point is, the minute I make this about me, then everyone who doesn't want to face the problem can dismiss it and say, well, it's just about a politician trying to get a job. My pain and anger has to pale in comparison to the loss of a fundamental right in a country that is grounded on the principle of access, on the principle of justice and fairness. And these larger debates we are having cannot be answered if people don't have the right to speak. And so, yes, I'm going to always be angry, but I know I can't go back in time and undo 2018, but I can make certain that 2020 and 2022 and every election from now on is more fair, more accessible, and that people have the right to be heard.
I want to come back to you, Stacey, in a minute about what's more at stake than just your particular election and the presidency, because you were and are such a great character, guys, to be the centerpiece of a doc. Number one, I love seeing Stacey back in action in the day, where you've been involved. She has been involved in political service for a long time. What was it that the two of you saw about her and her story that you thought this is a really good story to tell? In addition to the charisma of Stacey, I get that, but was there something more to it than that? I learned so many things about you, Stacey, that I didn't know, and I thought I knew a lot, but I found myself going, God, that's so good.
Well, Gayle, we have to share that, Stacey explicitly had communicated she did not want to be in this film. She did not want it to be about her. And
for that I go, huh? Yeah.
And there
What's
was a
that
lot
I
of
do?
speculation
Yeah.
when we shared the first rough cut with Stacey. To her wisdom and credit, she understood that her story as a part of the spine was so important of allowing us to then access the bigger story, because you cannot separate the two. But there was some scary moments when we were waiting for response after we shared it with her.
Liz, do you have a story like that when it comes to Stacey?
Well, it was a shared story, as Lisa and I were like texting back and forth, like, when are we going to talk to? Oh, she wants to talk Sunday. Okay, can you talk? There was all of that, because but I think that Stacey was able to, she has her self hat and her political hat, and then she also had her producer hat, and her producer hat supported the idea that, yes, by telling that one story, you help make sense of the larger one. We were never going to make a story that was solely the Stacey Kemp, battle, right? I mean, that is of course interesting and dramatic, but what gives it real depth and urgency is, that's the Hydra with the new face that Lisa was talking about. It had that ugly face of KKK terror, of literacy tests, of poll taxes, and now of exact match and narrow ID. That, it's that evolution that makes that race important. Of course, it was important for Stacey to win the governor's race and for people to have their votes counted. But what's most important is our democracy.
Yeah. I'm glad that you all convinced her. Stacey, I got a big kick out of seeing your parents in the documentary. Were they okay with it?
Oh, they haven't seen the final version. I wanted them to see it when it premieres streaming on the 18th. We're going to have a socially distanced but family viewing party. So I'm excited about that. But they were very happy. My dad was, both my parents were voting rights activists as teenagers. They were in the civil rights movement. My dad was arrested as a 14-year-old. But my parents believe in the work that they raised me to do, and they believe in the work that we do now.
Well, I would think as a daughter, you have done them proud. Many people think when they talk about voter suppression, we're focusing on the presidential election. But I think, Stacey, it's important for people to know this is so much bigger than the presidential election, what we're talking about today.
Well, I think as Liz and Lisa show so eloquently in the film, voter suppression is hyper local. It's what happens when you go to your county elections office. It's the fact that we have to fight it at every level, but most of the decisions that guide our lives don't happen in Washington. They happen in your state capitals, at your city hall, and your county commissions. And so we have to think about voter suppression not just as an issue of who becomes the president of the United States, but who becomes a school board member and decides whether our children learn to read or have the money siphoned away from their education. Do our potholes get fixed? Those are also questions that are decided by gerrymandering, because if only the wealthy get to make decisions at the city level, if only certain races get to make decisions at the school board level, then we're going to find ourselves not only segregated, but isolated from opportunity. And so I want people to leave all in knowing that this isn't just about winning a national election, although that's incredibly important. It's about understanding that our access at every level of government is determined by the same systems. And if those systems don't work on the presidential level, by God, they don't work on the local level either.
Oh, that's beautifully said. As we wrap it up, Lisa and Liz, what do you want people to take away? What's the one takeaway other than educating yourself and making sure you vote? What is the heartstring that you're trying to pull as people are watching it? I felt many emotions, guys, when I was watching.
I would just say that, your right to vote is yours, and don't let anyone take it away from you. And you can see the people who have fought, who have given their lives, who have lost their lives for this right. And, hold on to it. Don't let anyone take it. And that kind of rage or anger that you might feel during the film is actually turned into righteous action.
Lisa?
It is not only our right, it's our duty. And the engagement that one can have with the process is multi-pronged. You can show up, but then you can take it a step further. You can become a poll worker. You can take it to another level and have viewing parties with this film for your community. We are who we have been waiting for. We are the hope, we are the promise, and it's time that, like the Power Rangers, we activate.
Yeah, they don't call us we the people for nothing. We the people. Stacey, is it premature to ask you if you have your sights set on any other political office? I know we want to get through 2020. I get that. Is it a fair question?
I'm going to run for another office, but my current mission is making certain that no matter what I run for, the people who have the chance to make the choice actually get the right to make that choice.
And that other office starts with the letter what? I didn't catch it.
I'm sorry, Gayle, did you ask a question?
Congratulations, the three of you. The name of the documentary is All In, the Fight for Democracy, which this is such a timely piece because we're going to the polls in 54 days, 54 days. I'm going to go. I was going to mail mine in. Now I feel stronger than ever. I want to go and be there in person. Hey, are you worried about COVID? All of you, are you worried about the effect that COVID will have on this election?
I think that that's why we say make a plan early, vote by absentee if you can and you want to. If you don't plan to vote by mail, vote early in person. And then if you need to, vote on election day. We have to remember that not everyone has the choice to vote by mail, so you want to make it as safe as possible for those who need to vote in person. COVID is among us, but we can make it safe. And if we want to recover, we've got to make choices about what recovery looks like. And that happens at the polls on November 3rd.
I also think it's important.
Election season.
I think it's important to remind people that we maybe, possibly, more than likely, won't have a result on November 3rd because they will have more mail-in ballots than ever before. But that does not make the election illegitimate. And I don't want people to think that because, well, we don't know yet, that there's something awry here. I think that's very important. We have to keep hammering that point so that people know it's so important. We're so used to having an election, the result that night or early in the morning. That probably, most likely won't happen this time, but that in no way takes anything away from that election. So I'm suiting up, masking up, gloving up, and I'm going to vote in person, and I can't wait. Thank you for your time, and bravo.
Thanks, Gayle.
Thank you, Gayle. Thank you.
Bye.